Acts chapter 10, verse 9. This is going to shock you. I would like to go back to verses 1 and 2. And the reason is it's just kind of been, I don't know what the right word is, sitting on me. This character called Cornelius, and we analyzed him real closely as far as being a centurion, a part of the Italian cohort, and the whole aspect of being a devout man of God who feared God, and yet he was a Gentile. This was really before, what we're experiencing right here in this passage is the gospel message being delivered to the Gentiles, really for the first time. You could argue that there might have been Gentiles there at the day of Pentecost and all that, and you're probably correct. But this is kind of the intentional God moving the church outside the parameters of Judaism into the world of the Gentiles. And so this guy, Cornelius, my understanding is that he probably was a pagan, probably a polytheist, meaning he had many gods, and he just added Yahweh to one of those many gods. That's what makes the most sense to me. However, he adopted a lot of Jewish traditions. We don't know how far those traditions went that he adopted as a part of his own spirituality and religious life. We do know that he observed the times of prayer that was a part of Jewish customs, because it articulates that he was praying at the 9th hour, which was a typical time of prayer in Judaism. The reason I want to go back is one piece that I just kind of mentioned in passing, but I think is really important, especially for us in this day and age, to pay attention to, and that is in verse 2, it says he was a devout man who feared God. We talked about that ad nauseum. But then with all his household. So his entire household. Back then when you would talk about a household, you're talking about probably spouses, you're talking about kids, you're talking about servants, and other family members that might be living in that house. So they were all reflecting this religious life that Cornelius was kind of establishing as the head of the household. So the reason I want to look at that is I think that speaks to a condition that we find ourselves in this day and age, where we have younger generations sliding away from the faith or not seeing the faith as quite important and what's going on. So I found this quote. It's from a book by Gresham J. Machen, who was the editor of the Greek New Testament grammar that I had in college. So his name always strikes fear within my soul whenever I hear it. But he's got some good insights. So he wrote a book called Christianity and Liberalism. And when he's talking liberalism, he's not talking political liberalism. He's talking about theological liberalism. And what theological liberalism is moving away from an orthodox understanding of the gospel and replacing it with other things. So the whole adiaphora thing, as you drift from the center of the gospel and see adiaphora pieces being more important, you're kind of drifting into a liberalism type understanding. So this is what Machen wrote. The most important of such institutions, so we're entering his argument partway through, according to Christian teaching, is the family. And that institution is being pushed more and more into the background. It's being pushed into the background by undue encroachments of the community and of the state. In other words, a lot of what the family saw as their role in helping raising the next generation, the community and the state are kind of taking those over. Modern life is tending more and more toward the contraction of the sphere of parental control and parental influence. The choice of schools is being placed under the power of the state. The community, quotations, whatever you define community as, is seizing hold of recreation and of social activities. Is this making any sense to you guys?
Yes.
It may be a question of how far these community activities are responsible for the modern breakdown of the home. Very possibly they are only trying to fill a void which, even apart from them, had already appeared. So in other words, families might have been failing and tried to supplant with something else. But the result, at any rate, is plain. The lives of children are no longer surrounded by the loving atmosphere of the Christian home, but by the utilitarianism of the state.
How old is this book?
I'm going to get there.
Oh, okay.
A revival of the Christian religion would unquestionably bring a reversal of the process. The family, as over against all other social institutions, would come to its rights again. So his argument is that for families to regain their influence of raising the next generation, a Christian revival needs to happen. And to answer your question, when do you think it was written?
Probably a lot longer ago than we would expect.
I was gonna say the 50s. I was gonna say that.
1923, he wrote this. And I'm like, oh my. I mean, he could have wrote it yesterday and it would be just as profound. 1923. So this has been a slow decline that's been happening.
Is it a book or a prophecy?
Yeah, exactly, right? So here is Greg Finke. Some of you know Greg Finke. He came and preached at our congregation. He's written Joining Jesus books. His third in the series is called Joining Jesus as a Family. So this is what he writes. According to nationwide research conducted by the Barna Group, they're probably the preeminent research group focusing on religious life, especially in the United States. So their survey came to the conclusion that 85% of Christian parents believe that they have the primary responsibility for raising, discipling their children to be followers of Jesus. Sounds pretty good, right? On its face, this sounds like a good thing.
Only 85% of the Christian families?
Correct.
Yeah, there's 15%.
Right, 15 that don't think it's their responsibility. Parents are acknowledging their responsibility. Yay. Unfortunately, the research also found that a majority of the 85% assume they are fulfilling that responsibility by taking their children to church for an hour or two per week. Show up, push them out the door, go to Starbucks, come back, pick them up. Did my duty, right? I'm raising some good little Christians. Again, on its face, taking children to church sounds good. Except, the research also found that a majority of parents who assume they are fulfilling their responsibility by taking their children to church then spend little or no time during the rest of the week talking with their children about spiritual matters. So church is compartmentalized to an hour a week or a couple hours a week. This means a majority of parents assume the professionals and volunteers at church will be able to raise their children to be followers of Jesus for them, but it simply doesn't work that way. I heard it said one time, and I'm still chewing on this, but there's some truth to it, that one of the most disastrous, that's going to sound really bizarre, one of the most disastrous things that the church ever did was trying to emulate the model of the public school system for Sunday school. The public school gets those kids, 5 hours every day, 5 days a week. And the church emulates the same model, but only gets them for 45 minutes a week. And creates in the mindset of parents, I mean, there are parents who work with their kids on their homework at home. There's a lot of parents that, you're getting all that stuff at school, and I don't have time to do it at home. And so the same mindset is true with discipleship. What parents do day by day, week after week, makes a far deeper impression on their children, for better or worse, than what the church can accomplish in an hour or two once a week. This is my caution earlier, he said in his book. There are two main reasons for this: how your children are designed by God, and the sheer number of hours your children spend with you versus the professionals and volunteers at church. So if they come to church and they get a good dose of Jesus for 45 minutes, and then the parents don't talk about Jesus the rest of the week, which do you think speaks louder? The vacuum created by parents. Your children are designed by God to watch. Boy, do they watch. Imitate and become a version of you. Which means it's an unsound strategy for you to send your children to church hoping they will somehow become a version of their pastor or their youth director instead. Part of this study that just inspires me so much is one of the least influential things that affect a person's faith development as a young person.
Sermon?
The sermon. Yep, the sermon is like, it's like barely making the top 25.
I didn't mean that against you.
No. I totally hear it though. It's not how God designed discipleship to work. So the sermon, just taking that for an example, is a part of discipleship. It is the apostolic part of discipleship. But true discipleship happens in relationship, modeling service, modeling faith, modeling devotion, modeling worship, modeling all those things. That's where true discipleship happens. So Jesus, when he was discipling his disciples, that was happening more when they were sitting down having these conversations while they were eating food than it was dramatic sermons, even though he preached a great sermon with the Sermon on the Mount. But notice there's, I think, just one of his sermons that's recorded, but all of the conversations, well, not all, a larger number of conversations are recorded than his sermons. And I bet he preached a lot of sermons. Reactions to that. I'm bringing this up because of Cornelius and how he was, as a pagan, influencing the religious nature of his house. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. I understand what they're saying about not having a schoolroom like a Sunday school. But as a teacher, you have a time frame, and you gotta, do the lesson, ask questions, and do an activity. It's 45 minutes is just flies by sometimes.
And the difficult thing is not all kids learn the same way.
Yeah.
Some kids are very audible, some are very hands-on, some need to experience something, some are deep thinkers, some don't like to think at all, and you got them all in one group and you're supposed to somehow get it to them in 45 minutes.
And they have to be active a little bit too.
Right.
You can't just have them sit.
Exactly. Yeah.
Bible Study Fellowship really had an impact on me, how they're doing their infant and toddler program, but now they've extended it on in the morning for the school-age children. And I've sat in on some of their things, and Yvonne can talk more about it if she wants to, but they have as they get older, they have a workbook and they have daily assignments, and the parents, the moms are supposed to sit down and do it with them. And that's what I see is what we should be doing. Is there ever a time in the church, in the history of the church, that Sunday school was different?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you go back to the time of Luther, nobody was being taught anything, supposedly. And he did a survey, he did a Barna study of the Wittenberg parish area, and his reaction was, "Good God, what wretchedness I beheld." That was the summation of his, and he said not only the families, but the leaders themselves, the pastors. He said the pastors didn't even know what they're talking about. And so the development of the catechism was a response to that. But most people, what do we do as Lutherans? We use the catechism when?
Confirmation.
Confirmation. Who teaches confirmation?
Somebody else.
Yeah, somebody else. You send your kids to confirmation. Catechism, right in the front, Luther said, "This is written for the head of the household to teach their family." So what did we do? We grabbed it out of the head of the household hands and said, come to church. We'll do it better than you can. Oh, yes, that's just probably the opposite of what we should be doing. But will anything happen if we don't do it here? You know, so then you're kind of in this catch-22 type situation. So then he wrote the larger catechism for the pastors to straighten them out. Yeah.
My sister-in-law is an elementary school teacher, and based on some of the stories she's told the family, it seems very evident that parents get overwhelmed when they become partially acquainted with the verb version of parent. The noun part's easy, but the verb version of that, and they say, well, I'm not around them enough and I don't wanna deal with chaos at home. You raise my children for me.
Right. And now we have a whole nother dynamic. I mean, this isn't true for all parents. I know it's not true of Sherry and I, but an attitude of, okay, I'm sending my kid to school to be taught, and you better not fail them. If you fail them, I'm coming down on you, teacher, right? When 40 years ago, if the kid's failing, it was the teacher and the parents on the kid going, you know, why are you failing? You know, you need to try harder. Yeah, exactly, right? But now it's like they're coming down the teacher, so surprisingly, we're running out of teachers because they're like, I can't do it all. I can't raise your kids. You know?
I work in an office of less than 20 people, and we have multiple former teachers in that office.
Yeah, absolutely, right? You know, so what Gresham wrote back in 1923, what Finke's talking about, what Cornelius modeled, is extraordinary. Yeah, go ahead.
I think where the path is going nowadays for teaching kids is, which is pretty scary, is AI is now starting to teach your kids more than actual teachers in school or anything else.
Right.
And you don't know what they're teaching you
Right.
with AI, so.
Yeah, so social media is the teacher, right?
Well, the teachers used to have a great effect on kids until they took discipline out of it. You know, they're helpless. There's fights now in school, there's shooting, stabbings. And
Yeah,
the teacher will get, sued or fired if they touch them. Big mistake.
Yeah, Tracy Schmidt, she says, haha, wow, that is shocking because I can tell you with all certainty that followers of Jesus can't be taught that way. And then Children's Church is the latest thing that now takes kids away from families totally in church. Yeah, so the family becomes separated, and you know, there are how do I say this? There are parents who say, I don't get anything out of church when my kids are with me because I'm constantly working on my kids. I totally get that, you know, and we want adults to learn too. And so they're really excited when the kids go off during church, or at least part of church, to to get a further education, you know, and it's usually during the sermon piece, because a lot of times the sermons, I'll be guilty of that, are a little over kids' heads.
Which they should be.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just really kind of difficult sorting all this out. But to me, the biggest piece is figuring out how to get discipleship back in the homes. And yet parents are, might be skittish about their own faith, and so they're not sure, I don't know how to do this, you know, I don't know how to disciple. It's kind of like you bring in algebra homework, okay, you're on your own, right? I mean, it's kind of that mindset, you know, so we just gotta start somewhere and start discipling each other and helping each other to grow and be stronger in the faith.
Well, like Luann was talking about, beginning in the first grade, the BSS students read the same materials that the adults do. If the adults are reading 5 chapters of Mark that week, so are the first and second graders. And they have to take questions home and answer them and bring them back. And so that forces the parents to sit down. I mean, if they're gonna have them in the program,
Right.
you know, you think they're gonna do the work with the kids, and they do. It forces them to sit down and go help them. They either have to read it to them or help them read.
Right.
And help them answer the questions.
Yeah, and you know, like, well, you experience that Sunday school here. You have some kids who do have homes that are doing that type of thing of supporting them, and they come with a fairly strong biblical understanding of faith, understanding. And then you got others that they don't have a clue what you're even talking about. I taught at Dana for a while, for about 2-3 years, and they had me teaching night classes, so I would teach a 3-hour block. And one of the classes that I was teaching was Intro to the Bible. And so Del Hutton, who was the professor that taught it during the day, I said, okay, what textbooks do you use? And I'll just model everything you're using and I'll just recreate the class at night. And so he had his textbooks talked about the Rosetta Stone and all this kind of stuff, which got me energized because it's right down my wheelhouse and I was all set to talk about this stuff. And it was within 1 session, maybe 2 sessions, it was like, I gotta totally teach this differently, because I had people raising their hands going, now who's Abraham again? You know, and I'm like, oh baby, you know, and so I'm supposed to be a professor, but I'm wired to be a pastor. And the pastor side of me won out, you know, so I said, okay, the tests will be on the book, but I'm lecturing on something totally different. So I just gave Bible 101, which is what the course was advertised, because people didn't have any clue who the characters were. I mean, no connection, and it wasn't just like 1 or 2 people in the class. I think I had probably 20 people, 25 people in the class, and it was easily half the class had no biblical understanding whatsoever, you know? So, yeah, it's
How'd the subject of the Trinity go?
we didn't get there, surprisingly.
Got to numbers and then just burned
Yeah,
out.
exactly. Yeah, we nosedive at Judges. Okay. Now we'll get to verse 9, now that our class is half over. Next day, as they were on their journey, so if you recall, Cornelius sent a devout soldier from his century, along with a couple of the household servants, to go down and get Peter, because he was told in a vision, go bring this Peter guy back and listen to what he says. That was all God told Cornelius. And that's all Cornelius needed, because he recognized that this angel standing before him was more powerful than he was, called him Lord, said, okay, I will do whatever you ask me to do. So Cornelius doesn't know what's going to happen, And we as readers don't either. We don't know what God is up to. So they take off, and Joppa is about 30 miles from Caesarea Maritima, which is where Cornelius was at. So they went on their journey. Coming near the city, Peter went up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. So praying on the housetop, I've read so many scholars that say that was a normal place to go and pray. But he is up there praying, we're told, at noon. I don't know about you, but noon is not the time I would want to be outside on top of my roof praying. That would be rather uncomfortable, right? But all these scholars say it's normal, don't get worked up about it. And I thought, okay, why is Peter up on the roof? And then my thoughts went to last week's lesson on the tanner. And I thought, yeah, he is probably up on the roof because he can breathe up on the roof and probably can't breathe down in the house where the tanner is. So Peter goes up the housetop to pray about the 6th hour, that's noon. And because it's noon, he becomes hungry, desired something to eat. But while they were preparing it, he fell into a trance. So he's either meditating or he's fallen asleep or engaged in some sort of intense spiritual connection with God. Kind of a daydream maybe, yeah. And what he sees is the heavens open. I didn't check the word, but I think it's the word schizo, where we get schizophrenia, a separating. It's the same word that's used when the dove comes down when Jesus is being baptized in the Jordan River. Again, I didn't check it, but I would bet that that's probably the word used here. And something descending like a great sheet. Okay, again, remember when some of you were with me when we did Revelation, and John was constantly using this language in his vision where he would say, it was like. In other words, I don't know how else to describe it, because it was like this, but it wasn't exactly this. So, we say, oh, a sheet came down. Well, no, he said it was kind of like a sheet, but it really wasn't a sheet, but I don't know how else to describe it other being a sheet, like a great sheet coming down.
Pretty sure he didn't mean sheep?
No, he meant sheet, yep.
Okay.
Let down by 4 corners.
Explain what a helicopter is.
Yeah, exactly. How do you do that if you saw one back then? In it were all kinds of animals and reptiles and birds of the air. And there came a voice to him, rise, Peter, kill and eat. Remember, he's hungry, so it's kind of feed into this whole thing. Catch the pun there? But Peter said, no, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. How uncanny that I just preached on that last Sunday about unclean and common, the Greek word kainos. So, I thought about bringing my sermon back, but thought, no, I need to go a different direction. So, it's going to be similar but different. So, Jewish dietary laws. It is called kasherot. No. Kasherot. That's it. Kasherot. Or they got kasherut down there. Jewish dietary laws, known as kasherot, are a set of rules governing the preparation, consumption, and types of food that are permissible and forbidden. So it's not just about eating certain foods and not eating certain foods. It's also about how those foods are prepared, from how they're killed, to how they're cooked, to how they're presented, and the types of food that can be consumed by Jews, and types of food that are permissible and forbidden. So that's where the clean and unclean come. And again, when we hear those words clean and unclean, our minds instantly go to hygiene or health or something like that. These have nothing to do with hygiene, have nothing to do with health. They have simply to do with the prescription of God declaring what is clean and unclean. So these laws written in the Torah and developed through centuries of rabbinical interpretations dictate what can be eaten and how it must be prepared and how food can be combined. So there's even combinations of food that you can't do. Yeah.
It's like bringing the word to the Gentiles, or like people prepared or brought up in a life of, you know, having all their families be pagan and stuff, and how Gentiles weren't, you know, clean. They weren't fitting to have God as their God. But it's like, hey, don't say something's unclean when I made it clean.
Right.
You know, I
Yes.
want them for me to. So you're wrong, actually, humble yourself.
Right. And that's almost verbatim the words that come to Peter from the Lord relative to the Gentiles. Yeah.
Had Peter forgotten what Jesus said, there's no unclean food because it's gonna go all the way through you eventually.
Right, yeah, I mean, that's exactly the text that we looked at this
He must have
last
forgotten
week
that
from
Jesus
Mark.
himself said that.
Yeah, yeah, you know,
Why I solely eat fast food. So much grease. I can
yeah,
do it.
yeah. I heard a pastor once say, how dare you pray for when you go to McDonald's to eat that this might enrich your body. Don't test the Lord.
I saw the video, the one where it's like, dude, this is fried. This
Yeah.
is fried fries. that
Fried,
are
fried, yeah.
What do you mean? How will it nourish you? This is killing you. You're dying. This is death
Exactly.
food.
Not good for you. So in this whole regard, you know, you were asking about Peter and had he forgotten. Well, you gotta understand, I think, that even though Jesus was, you know, saying you don't have to wash your hands before you eat the food, and then he talked about it's not what comes into you, but what comes out of you that makes you unclean. So there was a reinterpretation of what unclean meant. And yet it's all Jews talking this language. So the sweeping out of the dietary codes, you've been raised in that since you were a little kid, and to all of a sudden just totally abandon it is a pretty dramatic thing. But we see Peter doing things like spending time at the house of a tanner, kind of going against some of his teachings. So he's kind of prepped for this vision that he gets. And there's a freedom that comes with that. A freedom not just from the dietary codes, but also a freedom to, like you were talking, end up evangelizing Gentiles that you have deemed unclean as well. So, you know, we have these codes of certain foods that are permissible and not permissible. We find that in the first 5 books, mostly Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And certain animals like mammals with cloven hooves, so that's the split hoof, who chew the cud. So it's those two things together. And seafood. Oh, I'm a big sinner right there because I love seafood. Seafood with fin and scales, not crabs and lobsters. They're considered kosher. So animals who have cloven hooves that chew the cud, so a cow would be permissible, and seafood with fins and scales, so any kind of fish. So you can eat all the tuna you want. They're considered kosher. Non-kosher foods, of course, include pork, which has a cloven hoof, but it doesn't chew the cud. Pigs just eat everything and swallow it. Why that's a standard, I have no idea. shellfish, and predatory birds.
I also know that like no snails or like insects,
So-
but also like eating grasshoppers and wild honey. It's like the difference between like a
In-
snail.
There's a whole section on insects, and I'm gonna get this wrong, but when it comes to four-legged insects, you can eat the ones whose leg has a joint, but the ones who don't have a joint, you can't eat them.
Like it without a joint.
It's wild. So, here's a little chart of the kosher foods. And when it comes to a cow, it's just the front end of the cow you can eat, not the
Oh,
hind part of the cow. I didn't really know that. And the place where these are articulated is Leviticus 11, Deuteronomy 14. They go into pretty great detail, but not as great of details as the rabbis in the Mishnah and the Talmud go. They go even deeper, slicing it even thinner. So animals you shouldn't eat: hogs, rabbits.
kangaroos.
Rabbits chew the cud, but they don't have a cloven hoof. So rabbits are unclean. Kangaroos are unclean. Not that there's a lot of kangaroos around the Middle East, but birds that are predatory or scavengous. So I've often joked that the only commandment that I know that I have never broken is eating vulture meat. And the reason that one rises up is I had a seminary professor who he was teaching our class one day, and he said, okay, there's one piece of scripture that I want to work into my sermon before I die, and that was, thou shalt not eat vulture meat. And so I finally did it one Sunday and said, never broken that commandment. I know that I've never broken that commandment, so I was able to work that into my sermon. Shellfish, mammals of the ocean, so you don't go eating your porpoises or your whales. And then combinations of food. There's certain food you can't mix meat and dairy. So cheeseburgers.
Swedish meatballs.
Might be how they're prepared, I don't know.
Well, it's got dairy and
Isn't just that combination derived from like the words, you shouldn't cook like a cow in its mother's milk,
Right, yeah, milk is a dairy, so you don't allow that to touch. You don't even use the utensils that would touch.
If the milk is, I don't know cow anatomy, but like if the milk is stored maybe like in the back half.
It would be in the back half, yeah.
It's to like the udder.
I've milked cows, they're in the back half.
Would this kind of be adiaphora? Like extra?
Not to a Jew.
Oh, yeah.
It would be incredible. It's one of the identifying means right there with circumcision and sacrifice and all those things. It's what it means to be a Jew.
aren't they taking it from scripture?
Yeah, right, Leviticus and Deuteronomy, it's right in there. So this is modern day practices that I'm talking about now, but I mean, they have a long lineage going back. So how the meat, not only how it's prepared, but how it's slaughtered. Kosher meat must be slaughtered according to specific ritual guidelines. The knife must be very sharp, used for a single unbroken stroke, and the bleeding out is how the animal dies. Slaughtering is performed by a certified shoket. Oftentimes the shoket is a rabbi. When I took Hebrew up in seminary, our seminary professor that was teaching the class, he took us to a very wealthy family in Minneapolis. I mean, their house was, but this guy owned all these kosher slaughterhouses all over the United States. And that's all they did was kosher slaughter. But it was only on certain days that the slaughtering happened. And there was a rabbi who was there that either did the slaughtering or he watched the slaughtering happening to declare that this is a kosher piece of meat by the way that it was slaughtered. Jewish law mandates that the animal be healthy without defects, so the rabbi will check the animal over before slaughter. Intent is to cause a rapid drop in blood pressure, loss of consciousness, ensuring minimal suffering. But PETA is all over these guys saying this isn't proper, but it had more to do with the fact that the animals were kind of put on a rack type thing and would come up, and then the slaughtering would happen, and it was the rack ride. And I guess PETA had a bigger problem about.
I think like with the beginning, God's people were told to be different than all of the people around them.
Correct.
Like the Amalekites, they drank blood
Right.
and everyone, around them. So, not drinking blood is just like okay, now we're gonna do everything without blood entirely, even touching our thoughts.
The blood has to be totally gone. Yep, that's why the bleeding happens. After the slaughter, the meat is thoroughly drained of blood and examined to ensure its kosher status. Kosher slaughterhouses are typically separate from non-kosher facilities to prevent contamination. Kosher slaughterhouses receive certification from recognized agencies to ensure compliance with strict standards. I believe there are some slaughterhouses that do both, but they don't do both at the same time, and there is a massive cleaning that happens before the day of kosher kill. Here's what you were talking about, separation of meat and dairy. Meat and dairy cannot be cooked or eaten together, and separate utensils and cookware are required. And that doesn't just mean at that meal, that means all the time. These utensils are solely for meat, these utensils are solely for dairy. So there's no crossover.
Put cheese on everything.
Yeah. Specific methods for salting, roasting, and preparing meat are required to remove blood. Make sure the last drop of blood is gone. Products that meet kosher standards are often certified by rabbinical authorities, indicated by a Hesher mark on the packaging. So you can go to Hy-Vee or Baker's, and if you go, I wonder if this is kosher or not. You examine the packaging, and if you see a Q or a K on there, then that's the kosher mark on the packaging. Islam does real similar things as far as dietary codes. They don't use the word kosher, they use the word halal. And so when I was in Jordan, we ate a Kentucky Fried Chicken, just to say we'd eaten at a Kentucky Fried Chicken in Jordan. And all the napkins said, the meal is halal. So they said, you can eat this. You don't believe us? Read your napkin. So. Separate utensils, cookware. Kosher homes often have multiple sets of dishes, pots, utensils, separated by category: meat, dairy, parave, which means neutral foods.
Some Jewish homes have 2 dishwashers.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Vegetables and fruits prone to insects should be thoroughly inspected and washed, because the insects, there are some that are clean and some that are unclean. So it's not just, you don't want to eat an orange with an insect in it or a worm in your apple, but you want to make sure that you're not eating unclean insects when you eat your vegetables. Bishul akum, cooking by non-Jews. Some foods, like certain cheeses and grape wine, require supervision by a Jew during preparation, because we Gentiles don't know what we're doing. So our friends, our Muslim friends, Abdul and his family, his wife's just a great cook, so we're always at their place eating. But we often have thought, can we invite them over for a meal, and you know, my grill has had pork ribs on it, you know, and can I cook steak on there or lamb or what, you know? And so we've never even ventured into it. I probably should ask him sometime, he'd tell me.
You can, we have a lot of Muslim family friends too, you just make a point that like, hey, I'm gonna respect your things, and then when I offer you food, they're, you know, they will trust that that food has been
Right.
prepared and thought of their religious constrictions while eating, otherwise you get like cursed for cursing.
Yeah. Exactly right.
Huh.
Eating kosher food. Following kashrut rules when eating out, especially in non-kosher restaurants, requires careful attention to ensure that the food meets kosher standards. I mean, imagine going out with some friends and it's like, is this place okay? And so normally, I think people of a kosher diet kind of know the places you can go and it would be safe, but there'd be times when, you know, you got some Gentile that has no idea what they're talking about. Want you to go to Porky Butts or something. Which probably, just from the name, they would know that's not. Maintaining a kosher kitchen, here's kind of what Yvonne was saying. Having separate utensils, cookware, storage for meat and dairy products helps ensure that meat and dairy are not mixed. And then when Passover happens, they gotta make sure there's no yeast anywhere or anything like that. My mom bought an oven and when she was showing it to me, she said, yeah, this is a really weird oven. And I said, why? She said, there's a Sabbath setting. So the whole work thing, you can put your food in there. Hopefully it won't go bad while it's in the oven, but then you have a Sabbath setting, so you don't have to push buttons on the Sabbath to cook your food. So it has like a 24 or a 30-hour prep window where you can set it to start cooking at that time.
They have refrigerators that way too.
That same way, yeah.
Well, the Jewish Shabbat down there or whatever, they have like 12 children, and their oldest, they always wanna educate their oldest one out in New York at some university or something, so they drive out there. But they know where they can stop across the United States to eat.
To eat?
And, or they take things along, and at one time, this friend was telling us that the hotels, the buttons on the Sabbath, every button, you stop at every floor, cause you can't push a button,
Can't push the button.
you just get on
Just
the
wait
elevator.
until you get to your store or your floor. Interesting. That could drive you nuts if you're in a hurry, or you gotta go to the bathroom real bad or something.
Holding it is work, you're not allowed to hold it.
There you go.
Right on the oven.
Preparing food for Sabbath or a holiday, certain foods are prepared specifically for Shabbat, the Jewish Sabbath, or holidays such as Passover, which has unique kosher requirements, like making sure that you sweep all the yeast out. So a thought that came to my mind was, you got this group called Jews for Jesus. And I thought, you know, what makes them Jewish and what makes them Christian? What I discovered is that Jews for Jesus are kind of all over the board as far as dietary codes. Usually they will keep some, but not be obsessed about them. There are also Jews for Jesus that say, okay, Jesus ended all that, so that's not a part of our Jewish identity as believers in the Messiah. But there are some Jews for Jesus that hold to the strict dietary codes, but yet believe that Christ is the Messiah. So they're kind of all over the board, but it was really good. This one comment said, but they don't judge each other on where their standards are, so they don't really come at each other. It's just like, okay, that's where you're at. So Ave Schneider, I've never asked him, you know, when he's been here, you know, what aspects of Judaism he still hangs on to, because that could be kind of fascinating.
There's a group on Facebook who they call themselves Hebrews. They do not call themselves Jews for Jesus, but they always argue that these passages that you're talking about in Acts, because they're reading the New Testament,
Right.
are still only referring to the foods, not referring to talking to Gentiles about.
Interesting.
Yeah, and they argue and argue. They call themselves Hebrews, but not Jews.
But not Jews. That's fascinating.
They're not Jews for Jesus.
Huh.
I think it might be like a difference in placing like importance on, if you love me, you will keep my commandments, when Jesus says that. I'm like, what is a commandment? What isn't a commandment? Or like,
Right.
okay, well, this does set me apart from everyone else, and that's one thing that I'm gonna do. Just like a lot of misconstrued or misconstrusions.
Right. People putting emphasis in places that really shouldn't have that
Creating
emphasis.
a contradiction
Right.
without the context.
Right, exactly.
Isn't Hebrew the bloodline and Jew the faith?
Well, I think Jews would argue that they have a Jewish genealogy as well. But Hebrew tends to be the word used more during the time in Egypt, the time wandering in the wilderness. And the Jewish identity really kind of formed itself as the tribes settled in the Promised Land, because their kingdom was Judea. And that's where the term Jew comes from, is from Judea. So it is a later term. I don't know that they would describe separate things other than a different time period of identity as people. I've never heard that. It could be true.
It's like a religion and a people. Like it travels through the mother's side. Like if your mother's
Yeah.
Jewish, then you'll be, accepted into.
Yeah, to be a Jew is, for Christians, we identify, well, to be a Christian, you have faith. Well, to be a Jew, it's really more than that. Faith is one aspect of it. And Islam would probably argue the same thing, that faith is a piece of it, but there are other things, identifiers. But in Judaism, I think there would be more of a genealogical identity as well as faith, where in Islam that might not necessarily be as true. Islam definitely practices proselytization much more than Judaism does. Like Judaism, you almost have to be born into it. It's almost rare that you enter into it other than like through marriage or something like that.
There's a big importance on genealogy because of the different prophecies, like
Right.
the later king in the line of David.
Right,
Or
what tribe you're
back
connected to.
What tribe, or
Yep.
like who do you belong to, like if you're.
Yep.
Back to the kosher food.
Yep.
If a Jew has eaten kosher food all his life, let's say he's 50 or 60 or whatever, and all of a sudden he finds out he just ate something non-kosher.
You probably have to go through a ceremonial cleansing. It would,
Perish.
yeah, you'd probably, I absolutely believe that the rabbis have outlined the procedure to get yourself straightened out and they probably separate between accidentally eating the food and intentionally eating the food. It's probably different strictures there as well. That's a great question. I would assume it would have time. You'd have to spend time in the mikvah and what other penance pieces you'd have to do. But there's always this aspect of being brought back into the community. But you gotta go through a period of purification.
I was raised where you don't eat meat on Fridays, and I still don't eat meat on Fridays. And what if I eat meat on a Friday by mistake, I feel like oh no, now what do I do?
10 Hail Marys.
So what do you do?
Nothing.
Nothing, yeah. You just feel guilty.
You just feel bad.
You just repent.
And then I choose I'll choose another day. If I eat something on Friday that's meat, I just won't eat meat on Saturday, you know?
Yeah, you're
And,
weird.
and it's not that hard. There's so many good things that are not,
Oh, yeah.
you know, it's not as hard as you, but it's just a mental thing.
Right.
There's
Really?
doctors for that.
Oh, you Lutheran.
Yeah. Don't judge.
All right, this is where we'll end tonight. We made it all the way to verse 15, where we'll pick up next week. We're flying through this, Al.
Hold on a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. You felt the dampness. All right, let's close the prayer. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks and praise for the power of your word and for your coming to us and with a message that reaches the entire world. We pray, Heavenly Father, that you would inspire us to be good disciples for the next generation, and that we would not be afraid to share the gospel truth of Jesus Christ with them or with others. And we pray, Heavenly Father, that you'd inspire us in all settings to be your bold witnesses. In your Son's holy and precious name we pray.